Rajan Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to take what no doubt will be my final call on the committee stages of this bill on the title and commencement. And I thank Jacinda Ardern for those last series of comments, because she begins to get to some of the more important questions about this bill that have not been answered, and certainly the title does not reflect any of the kind of thinking that Jacinda Ardern was talking about. We know so much in today's world about children and families. We know so much today about the historical ways in which we've addressed their needs, and which ones have failed and which ones have been successful. And when we even go back to residual forms of provision for the vulnerable, how unsuccessful they've been. And we also know today how there are so many opportunities to take a developmental approach to this sector. And yet, this bill hasn't taken that opportunity. And that bothers us. We've also lived at a time when, and even the Minister has talks about this ad nauseum, about being evidence-based, ensuring that our social policy and our legislation, Mr. Chairman, is evidence-based. Well, this bill is not. I mean, it's very, very clear that from the submitters, from the research that's around, unless you're very, very selective about that research, that the evidence that's available has not been utilised. And even those of our major institutions in New Zealand who submitted to us would agree that it doesn't reflect current knowledge, and it's not evidence-based. So perhaps a more appropriate title might be Social Security Not Based on Evidence Amendment Bill. Because when we look at what the Human Rights Commission told us, they said that there were less intrusive ways to achieve the goals of social obligation than through the kinds of sanctions that this bill has come up with. There were less intrusive ways. And why have we not taken those less intrusive ways? Because somehow the government wants to appear tough, wants to appear to knock those who, in their own ways, seems to be abusing the system, and this will kind of fix it. So in that, the government and the minister is pandering to that element of a support base that actually sees this as a troubled and troubling part of our community. But these are still our mums and dads. These are the people who are bringing up our children. They deserve the best. This is why this system has been designed. Caritas noted, and that's a highly respected organisation, the potentially severe impact of financial sanctions, and submitted that there needed to be checks and balances. So here, a kind of financial sanctions, 50% financial sanction is a severe sanction on the most vulnerable. So the title could be, 50% sanctions in there somewhere, to say that we will punish the children, and we're visiting the sins of the parents onto the most vulnerable. And I can't see how the minister could defend that, other than simply wanting to be punitive towards this particular vulnerable sections of our community. So the word punitive and punishment ought to be in the title as well, because it is what the bill reflects. We had the Methodist Church raise concerns that sanctions won't be used with great discretion. So they were concerned about that. And these sanctions of this type in our work and income social security legislation in practice takes on a life of its own, and becomes, and despite the assurances given to us by officials, that in practice it takes on a life of its own. And that's a concern that we would want to raise again, and perhaps the title, to be honest, might have reflected that as well. The Children's Commissioner actually gave advice to the committee that rather it was much more important to use non-monetary sanctions. And they said there was some good evidence around using financial incentives and including that in the bill somewhere, and around attending parenting courses and things like that. So there are lots of things here, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Rajan,
thank you, sir. So there's lots to be said about how this bill does not use either the current science available to us today or current knowledge available to us today. So there is something else that's driving this particular bill. And I think members opposite, when they took calls on the second, on part two of part one of the bill, actually did give the lie to that type of perspective, which is that this is about a concern about the amount of money that's spent in this field and about those people taking advantage of the system. The next series of comments, Mr. Chairman, is really about bringing up children. This bill is not about, says nothing about how we ought to be bringing up children today. Again, so, that could be bringing up children is not work, is what is the underlying assumption of this bill, underlying premise and underlying value of this particular bill. And why is it not work? You know, any mum or dad bringing up children, particularly if you're on your own, but for any mum and dad, it is important work, and yet we give that no value. If you happen to be not reliant on the state for an income, then yes, you have that choice. But why is it that the children of our most vulnerable are not enabled to spend time with the children in those critical years from 0 to 5? So there's no value placed in this bill, Mr. Speaker, on parenting. I think that was a point that the Children's Commissioner was making. You know, if parenting is what we ought to be focused on, then let's build some incentives around parenting. And we would have supported something like that. But not here. We seem to separate out this need to punish and yet not use the knowledge available to us. So I'm concerned, Mr. Chairman, that is a worry, and a title could reflect that. The next point I want to make is punishment is the theme. No matter how the Minister and her colleagues dress this thing up, it is about punishment. It is punishing those who get to a particular place in their lives. The Minister says, you know, I know I'm expecting a lot of people, but she gives the impression she understands that. I don't think she does. If she did, then the provisions here would have been different. But certainly there's the not enabling parents of or sole parent with a 14-year-old teenager, taking that right out of the system is I think something that we will regret down the line, Mr. Chairman, because bringing up 14-year-olds is still a difficult task, particularly if you've got a 15 or 16-year-old as well. But they are now taken right out of the system, and others don't have that opportunity. But finally, Mr. Chairman, I want to say this, and it's the last opportunity with officials being here. I did want to acknowledge the work of the officials. You know, they worked with us for several months, answering all kinds of questions we put to them, and dutifully and indeed pleasantly, they brought that information to us, explained it, and even at times when it was difficult, they did that. So I want to sincerely thank the officials here, and that includes the legal people as well from Parliament here as well. So thank you very much for that. So Mr. Chairman, there are lots of reasons why this bill ought not to be supported. And I think my colleagues have, over the months that we've debated these provisions, we've not convinced this minister one iota, because and there ought not to be this distance between those of us in this House with some knowledge and experience in this field, bringing that to bear on good policy and practice. But the government has been blind to that. The minister has turned her eyes away from that and has brought together a bill that I think in time we will regret and we will need to fix. And I'm sure it will be left to a Labour government to fix it, as indeed all of the mistakes in the social legislation of a Conservative government has had to be done in the past. And with those words, I thank you very much.
Honourable Phil Heatley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to bring the Parliament back to some key facts around the bill in regard to the commencement date and the